I think it's a sort of particularly poignant way that Mr. Moix closed, which is in fact where we began, as to whether or not this is a question of politics, economic policy, or whether or not design has a role in the negotiation and sort of anticipation of these kind of projects. So with that, I open it up to Richard and Jamie.
Thank you. Very stimulating day, really. Lots, wide-ranging material, from discussions of aesthetics to designer anxiety about shit. I found the discussions on entropy particularly fascinating. And then, of course, real economic issues sort of underlying the whole day, which is so perplexing. And, you know, I feel a kind of equal combination of disempowerment and inability to grasp the magnitude and the complexity of these issues. And then on the other hand, I think I will leave feeling optimistic that all the presentations, within each and every one of them, there were clues, I think, as to how we can proceed. And I'm particularly, I guess, proud that landscape architecture as a discipline seems to be an area where these ideas have been generated in this early part of the 21st century. I think we've seen today an insistence on working with systems, not objects, particularly not ridiculous, expensive objects. This shift to chasing complex systems and trying to understand them and trying to design the system, as it were, rather than the final aesthetic formal outcome, is a very promising turn, because it's part of a larger paradigm which is ecological. And the conclusion to the keynote address that we just heard was, somewhat romantically, I think, we have to look after the land. But I take the point. At the end of the day, all of these systems come from the land, they all return to the land. So we now need to design each and everything, from the smallest product to the biggest city, with that complete life cycle in mind. Easy to say, difficult to do. But as I said, I think we've seen clues today in all of the presentations which is a sort of groping toward a new design paradigm, a new movement at the early part of the 21st century, which is about converting existing mechanistic cities into more complex, sophisticated metabolic organisms. And you know, I could talk forever about the sort of the weird aesthetic pleasure of looking at the sublime dereliction of contemporary Spain, but I don't think that's, for me, the big issue. The big issue is the shift in design methodology, the paradigm shift in a more broad sense, culturally, as we move into this century. The incomplete project of modernity, and I do think it is complete. Our Faustian bargain with modernity is not going to stop. The stakes are just getting higher and higher. To put it to just finish this comment with setting a larger scene for you, the symmetry of our dilemma is this. There are currently 7 billion people on the planet. The demographers are telling us there will be 10 by century's end. So the city we need to talk about is the city of 3 billion yet to come. Where are we going to build it, and how are we going to build it? How do we build it on principles of ecology? How do we build it on principles of social justice? How do we set it upon new understandings of stable state economics? We don't even have the imagination for stable state economics yet. We will have to double our food production to feed those people. And assuming those people aspire to live the way Americans and Europeans and Australians have been broadcasting the good life for the last century, then we're going to need to either find some more planets or maximise the sophistication by which we extract resources out of our current limited ecosystem. The only optimistic way you can look at that is to place faith in design, which is the application of design intelligence to these issues. And all I can say is good riddance to what happened in Spain. In the bigger picture, in the longer run, it'll be good for Spain. It's good for us. Everyone can learn a lesson from this. In fact, many other countries have done the same sort of thing in different ways, so that's my optimistic take on what I think is a very dramatic point in history at the end of a very dramatic economic cycle.
Speaking as an architect and a practitioner to rather large projects, the discussion about the need to include in the larger scope of design, not just architectural design, but landscape design, ecological design, waste system design, etc., is an important consideration. But at the same time, there are maybe even larger subjects which you've hinted at that need to be thought about at the same time. And if we were to maybe draw 3 simple circles of economics, politics, and design, there are many others, or one could find shades in between. But what has happened in Spain, or maybe still happening, what happened here in the United States in the 1970s with the S&L crisis, what's happened in parts of Asia, certainly 1997 was a clear example. The maladjusted balance between the flows of capital and the needs of a real economy. Whatever, you can define real economy a number of ways, but the real needs that we feel and could be communicated on a more micro level were way, way out of whack. Unfortunately, some of the techniques or the strategies that allowed that to happen were exported from Wall Street, and they were invented not so far from here by young bankers who were the smartest people in their generation, some of our friends, I'm sure, and they did great things internally to the banking world, but it left some terrible kinds of out of whack situations. So that's something which I think we all try to understand at first, perhaps by reading, talking to economists, ecologists. Everybody has their sort of thinker of choice, but rarely do we find one who gives us a satisfying understanding of what we really need to do going forward. So whether you read Paul Krugman or Martin Wolf or Al Gore, 2 of whom won Nobel Prizes, so they should have something to their name, although that doesn't guarantee much in terms of future prediction, usually guarantees an intelligent review of the past. But if we look to these economists, I think we have a sense that not only do we have to view so many issues, factors, and understand them together in balance, not to look only specifically at one set of issues, but also that we have to see every different context in which we work as designers as very different. So looking from the point of view of an architect or city planner or a developer at London or New York or Hong Kong, or Paris or Shanghai, it's a very, very different set of issues. Very different kinds of response are appropriate. And I want to make a little bit of a case for some of the larger larger scales of project, larger initiatives and agendas of projects, which I think can be of help. Because there's a bit of a loaded vocabulary in the prospectus to this nice symposium of a kind of small is beautiful, large, cannot be agile. Maybe that's a bit strong because agility is perhaps the word that then invokes the hope that even the large can move intelligently. But some of the larger problems, which I don't know if anybody's read Al Gore's recent book. I just bought it, so I only read the introduction, but it looks like a compelling kind of review of many issues. That the issues that need to be tackled could be tackled one by one, small increments and granular kinds of responses that we all might engage in as responsible architects. But at the same time, there are larger kinds of strategies that need to be projected by planners and reflected by architects as well. So just to look at a few examples, I think can be inspirations to us, or at least might tell us that large projects are not the devil, but that we should apply ourselves to these large projects. We should remember that some of the large planning visions gave us structures, planning structures of cities we love, including London, Paris, and New York, that far outstripped the possible use of those kinds of planning applications in their day. So the grid of Manhattan of 1810, 11 was kind of just a suburban figment of geometry, only to be filled in many different ways, far beyond the conception of those who originated the plan. Haussmann's Paris was hugely destructive. It had been seen that way at the time, and one could debate, maybe today, in a philosophical sense, how much what was ruined needed to be ruined, and how much the sort of enlightenment and clarity of boulevards gives us something eternal today. And so, just because something in the way of a plan is a big plan and is beyond immediate implementation, and I don't mean the resorts in the sort of abandoned parking lots of Spain, because that's truly sad. But I'm talking about urban initiatives. And so what we see today in New York, for example, I think we can find an intelligent balance between the needs of commerce, the strictures of public policy planning, and then the creativity of architects. In fact, there has been sort of been an embracing of what you have called star architecture, but there's also been a sort of sobriety. And in fact, there have been periods in New York where there's been too much sobriety, where developers would not let 1 inch more of a mullion or 1 less inch of glass enclosure dictate the efficiency of a building, because it was a kind of mammonism of the reduction to the most kind of Philistine solution. That we saw plenty of buildings of that sort in the 60s, 70s. And in these cities, we see the industrial scars of rail yards that needed to be covered, of how could one build over a rail yard without a long span that cost $1 billion? So how could one make that project without a concerted effort that goes beyond the granular? And I'm not saying you're opposing this. I'm just trying to counterpose the sort of the devil in the large project in one context to the need for it in another. And I'll just finish by saying something about density and the use and the practicality and the optimal efficiency, in a way, since many discussions about waste, as was explained, have to do with efficiency, which is a very nebulous term, can be applied in many, many ways. But what I think we understand here in New York, the usefulness of increasing the number of people whose work can be accommodated in the very heart of the downtown, so that the car will, just as New York is many of us don't drive, which is great, and New York is a good example to the rest of the country. If it can continue to be a competitive place where buildings function in a modern way, which requires a certain renewal from time to time, there are initiatives now to increase, let's say, the density of the center of Manhattan. And so this takes a big vision. And it takes an understanding from all players, developers, architects, etc., to make design exactly nimble and adaptive. To say that just because a building is taller doesn't mean it meets the street poorly. Just because it feeds a developer's rent roll, it can't help the functions and the uses of shoppers, or even cultural uses. This is a great challenge for us. And one final thing is that in the context of global architecture, which brings many, many problems to the table, I agree with you. Sheldon Adelson makes, and the like, make a lot of very, very strange kinds of bedfellows of one design intuition or vision and a completely inappropriate application. But in the cities of the Far East in particular, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, and especially really the Chinese cities, the skill with which the people in the room and elsewhere, schools and professional settings, and even the governmental cadres of New York and other cities where these issues have been thought through time and time again, to bring those ideas to other parts of the world, not to close the door to exchange, but to see that there is a kind of global architecture that can bring intelligence to the specific needs of a specific place. There was a little bit of that dream with early modernism, with Core bringing sunshades to India, or Danish architects working in Jakarta, etc. But I think we should aspire to this and take what you've said as a challenge to make our responses intelligent and to make the global practice of architecture, which probably keeps half the architects in New York employed, to make it a fruitful thing and to be able to make better cities.
Just as a sort of response and a way to kind of open up, I mean, I think one of the things that Javier and I have been particularly interested in with this discussion has been, and Bill mentioned it a little bit, and Jamie mentioned it again, that these things are in fact cyclical, right? That we're dealing with cyclical processes in terms of economies, in terms of the supply and demand for urbanization. I think the reading that we have beginning to try to take is that those cycles are speeding up. And as they speed up, it demands in some way, or it's an occasion in some way for design and planning to step back and say the way that we've been operating where these cycles have been slow needs to somehow be recalibrated to the speed of those cycles. And in essence, that's, I think for us, and me in particular, I'm not anti-development. I don't think as an architect you can be anti-development. It's about urban growth, but it's how urban growth is conceptualized and how urban growth is deployed. It seems to me that the proliferation of these kind of ghost settlements is a point in time where we can begin to question our mode of operation, the tools we rely on as designers, how we measure the success or failure of our products, and the way that we evaluate how and when something is deployed. So in essence, it's that, yes, this is an issue of supply and demand, but how then do we operate differently when supply and demand frequencies change, when those things speed up, as they are seemingly beginning to do, as demonstrated by some of the projects we saw at the beginning of the day.
I think that the only point to consider, or one of the most important, is who benefits every one of those operations. Because many times most of the beneficiaries of the operations are the developers more than any other person. And I think that I said it before, we can't forget about common interest. And nowadays, we have seen here today that urbanism and ecologism, etc., has new tools and new ways to work with all those issues. The point is, do the economic and the political power want to take those kind of new technologies, new ideas, new ways of doing, and want to introduce it? Because the tools are there, they just have to take it and use it. And the problem is that many times they don't take it because they are not interested in taking it, because they are driven by economic interest and a quick profit.
I just would like to make a remark about the large scale that you were mentioning earlier. I don't have anything either against large scale at all. I think that large scale is a solution maybe for large scale problems. So the problem is, can you actually, if the city is the result of culture and place, is it actually possible to repeat the same formula again and again, like what we have? I think that's our concern, rather than scale. I completely defended it.
Most architects don't actually, very few operate unless it's a kind of modular housing with a kind of Boeing-like, design it and repeat it. I don't know any architects who work that way.
There's a problem with scale in terms of the way that different disciplines and professions are across it. Landscape architectural perception of things has no trouble shuffling between micro and macro in the same space of design thought. There's no problem with that. We are especially versatile in that regard. What I mean to say, though, is that the large scale, decisions at the large scale generally do not involve architects, so that's a fairly large chunk of contemporary design intelligence removed from the equation. Landscape architects are busy cleaning up the mess in brownfield sites where modernity has already been and left, or decorating capital. If they can get away from that for long enough, they can zoom out and start to take a more powerful view of things and get a more instrumental grip on scale. But they often lack the skills, the rhetorical and representational skills to mount compelling arguments to developers, to state and national governments and various other organisations which can seriously inflect the way in which large regional programs or landscapes are being shaped. So this leaves it to the planners. The planners have been, working away with their flatland of blobs and of colour, designating land use for the latter half of the 20th century. And the only organised international design movement per se has been the CNU, which is irrelevant to this century, apart from having a modicum of conservative influence over North American and some European residential developments. So there's a power vacuum there, and there's a massive slippage between what we're calling design intelligence and the scale of the problems. So somehow we need to bridge that. The schools, the disciplines, the professions, we need to rally and creatively try and scale up our operation. And it is a bid for power. I mean, I don't think we should be scared of power.
I say, just to reflect on a couple of situations, in one in Shanghai and one in Hong Kong. The major part of Shanghai, the Pudong district, the new zone, is, I think, nobody's idea of a very thoroughly understood at the time of its conception or implementation set of principles. It was actually a blend of 4 or 5 different competition entries, whether they were formal solutions or ideas about how cities work. But the planners really didn't know at that point. And so they made a relaunch, and so that's what we have today. But China did need something, and we can appreciate that while we have our ideas about what makes a good city, the Chinese actually needed places for banks and government departments.
Sure.
Today, speaking with the chief planner, Wu Jiang, chief planner at the time, now he's an academic, he would freely admit that if he were to do it all over again, to build the, whatever it is, 100 million square feet of buildings, he'd do it very differently.
Yeah.
But he says that without remorse, because he's on to the next regional project.
Sure.
So it's I'm not making a comment about it so much as just reflecting the importance of the transfer of knowledge and good ideas from the academy through to planners and back again. And I think there's tremendous willingness on both sides. The question is really, where will the forum be? Where this thing, it could be the Architectural League, it could be some other, and I just earlier this week was at a conference in Hong Kong focusing on the waterfront, where a slightly more mature idea about where design meets government is being implemented. So I think it gives us hope. And with that waterfront, as a landscape thinker, how can Hong Kong ever get a modicum of good green space without a master stroke? It's not going to happen in a granular fashion.
I think the thing that this conference is particularly interested in addressing, I don't disagree with anything necessarily that's been said, but I think something that does keep coming up is this issue of speed. That the development is occurring in many of these places at a rate that is quite, as you termed, uncontrollable and unforeseeable, right? And so if we know that to be the case, if we know that is going to be, that we're not going to know the right answer, that we're going to make mistakes, and I think as designers we, in some sense, need to accept the fact that we're going to make mistakes, does that demand that we change the way that we operate? knowing that we're going to do something that is in fact disposable. Like what happens when we actually start thinking of urbanization as something that's disposable and replaceable versus something that we're building for 100 years or 150 years? Does that fundamentally change the way that we operate? And I know for some that would be an ethical shift, but I think that's a shift that has to be considered given the fact and the rate of urbanization that we're seeing throughout the globe.
You're talking about large-scale, rapid delivery, lightweight, flexible urbanism.
I don't know what it is, but what I'm saying is that at that scale, to sort of establish permanence, if you're building it in completion, there's an expectation that it is in fact going to need to be replaced or it's going to need to be retrofitted. I mean, much of what we saw today was retrofit of modern projects.
Yeah, there is a kind of desirable sort of hyper-modernity, isn't there, somewhere over the horizon? Or maybe it's always been there, we've always wanted it, but we're still enamoured with putting foundations deep down into the earth, the classical idea of urbanism. I mean, urbanism now, what you really need is a desalination plant and away you go. Desalination plant and an airport. And fast housing that can move and shuffle. These sorts of, like sometimes our romanticism sort of holds us back from what might be a radically ecological view of things. And entropy too, we've talked a lot today about entropy. It's marvellous that we're terrified by entropy. The British were absolutely horrified when they realised that the second law of thermodynamics was a truism, that everything would kind of run down, and that disorder is the sort of natural tendency of the universe. But I think that, since Robert Smithson pulled up a truck in Rome in 1968 and dumped asphalt down the slope of a rubbish dump and called it art, things have changed. We're now literally going with the flow, or at least trying to go with the flow. So what we've heard today from some of the speakers, new conceptions of how the natural world works and the semi-deterministic dynamics of the natural world do seem to me to offer us clues as to how we can shape cities, mass-produce cities for big numbers of people, which are still in some way synchronised with ecological systems and the metabolic flows of inputs, outputs, wastes and so on.
The point is, who are the players? I mean, it's not a matter of large-scale projects. A large-scale project can be the nicest one in the world, or can be ugly. A small one, the same for a small one, can be right or wrong. This is no problem, the scale to me. The problem is who are the players who are playing in the playground.
Sure, well that's what I mean.
And who are the important, the mighty players. Because someone said here, I think that you said that, talk about intelligence removed from the operation.
Yeah.
Right? This is the problem.
I've been sitting here all day up there thinking, a few blocks from here, there's a bunch of people making design decisions. They've moved billions of dollars around the world today that are involved in energy systems, food systems, caught up in large infrastructure systems, urbanisation. And these people are making those decisions on a very, very narrow basis. I mean, it's really, the world has been reduced to numbers. It's extremely crude. And there's such a disconnect between the way in which capital flies around the world and where it takes root briefly and then moves on, and the way we operate. And we kind of need to speed up. We need to know that system.
Sorry, just a second. Daniel this morning put it very clearly. He said, I, as an urbanist, at the beginning of the 80s, politicians asked me what they should do. I was the technician, so I was the one who had the knowledge, more or less. I'm a professional at this, so I know something. But from 85 on, politicians, so to say, their clients, discovered that the interesting thing in all that kind of operation was the money they were collecting. Because with that money they were able to build an auditorium, sports field, and so to have one more chance to win the next election. Because they were the kind of politicians who had been doing a lot of things for the town, okay? So And they put aside that intelligence, that professional intelligence, because it was not needed anymore. Well, it was needed, but their first need at this moment was to collect more money. And it's a money-driven society, and this is the main problem.
But I guess that, I mean, from my point of view, you know, we're not going to change the global capitalist system, right?
Yeah.
It's there, it's embedded. What the question is how we participate as designers and planners in that system.
Correct.
And not to sort of draw fault that the politician didn't listen to us or the developer didn't listen to us, but that the way that we participate in that is flawed. It's flawed because of that role that we currently reside in as designers and planners when it comes to this sort of conceptualization of large-scale territorial urbanization.
Or our complete lack of engagement with large-scale territorialisation, or strategies for territorialisation, or yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was saying at the beginning. Out of all of the presentations today, I think there were real clues and real substance as to, you know, if we could pull it all together and articulate it, which is the sort of continuation of this symposium. There's something there. The ingredients are there, and that, you know, that's very exciting. And as I said, very optimistic, really. I mean, what else can we do?